The Canadian League of Composers is sounding the alarm over potential federal spending cuts aimed at the arts, culture, and heritage sector. There are reports that the federal government is considering a 15% reduction in spending, which will impact museums, galleries, theaters, musicians, and so much more. August Murphy King is the general manager of the Canadian League of Composers. He joins us from Toronto this morning to talk about these potential cuts and the actions that the Canadian League of Composers is hoping to take. Nice to see you, August, and thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Nolan. Really appreciate it.
So, when did you first hear about these upcoming cuts to the Canada Council's funding?
So these cuts were first, we should be clear, they're not officially proposed yet. The process has basically been at the beginning of the summer, the Prime Minister's office tasked each minister to report back roughly right around now, in fact, with potential reductions in spending across their entire department of 15% over 3 years. And so for Department of Heritage, that could include cuts to, for example, the Canada Council. It could include cuts to Telefilm, Canadian Media Fund, the Canadian Book Fund. Basically, anything within the purview of the department could be subjected to up to 15% cuts.
So, what would those potential cuts, and it's good to be clear that these are not imminent cuts, but it's just there's a discussion about it. What impact would these kind of cuts have on the composers that you work with?
So the impact on composers would be pretty dramatic. For starters, the Canada Council already operates at a very high degree of efficiency. About 90% of their total funding goes directly out the door to artists. So only 10% are going to operating costs. And about 45% of composers in Canada have received funding from the Canada Council over the course of the past 5 years, to say nothing of the funding that goes to ensembles, individual performers, like large orchestras such as the Winnipeg Symphony Orchestra, which receives $1.2 million per year from the council. So a 15% cut to the council budget would be about $54 million. Based on the proportions I discussed earlier, that could probably be about 90% of that would be directly cuts to the funds that go out the door to organizations, allowing them to put on concerts, allowing them to commission music from new composers, or funds that go to composers who are looking to perhaps explore creating a new work, traveling abroad to attend a premiere to represent their music in Canada on the world stage. So these could be pretty dramatic should they go through.
Just maybe to contextualize this a little bit more, August, when it comes to composers receiving commissions and receiving funding for their work, how much of a factor is Canada Council for the Arts funding when it comes to the financial scope of what a composer does in Canada?
It's enormous. I mean, they are the largest contributor to commissions across the country, the second being provincial arts councils, obviously. But especially as you, let's say, move up the ranks of being a composer, especially as we're getting into larger scale work, such as operas, such as ballets, such as pieces for full orchestra, you're really looking at the bulk of a composer's commissioning fee coming from the Canada Council. Again, either directly the composer will apply to the council for funds, or the orchestra will apply on behalf of the composer. And the composer's fee depends. We don't have a precise percentage, but as I said, 45% of composers have received funding from the council in the past 5 years. And suffice to say that if that funding doesn't come through, one of two things will happen. Either the composer has to take a pay cut, and composers already don't exactly make a lot of money, or the piece just simply doesn't get created.
So, as you've been speaking with composers about these potential cuts that are on the table, what are you hearing from them about how they're feeling about all of this and how they're contemplating a future perhaps with even less money than, as you say, they're potentially working with right now?
There's, I would say, significant concern. As you can imagine, you know, post COVID, even though we're 5 years on, COVID was like apocalyptic for live music. obviously, and much like one thing I often say to people is like contemporary classical music is really a live thing, and really takes place in the concert hall. And so already 5 years on, composers' incomes are down. The average composer is pulling in, less than $30,000 from their composition work in a given year. They're working either maybe they're teaching, maybe they're performing, they're working on the side. So reductions in spend in funding from the Canada Council, are going to cause composers to have to compose less. They're going to have to spend more time doing other things other than composing. There's going to be fewer ensembles looking for new work because they won't be able to commission. And frankly, I can speak personally. I've seen many of my friends and colleagues who I'm a composer myself, and having attended school with them, they have left the business. They are doing other things, and I can only imagine that the less money there is in the ecosystem, more people will simply go, and maybe they'll go to law school, maybe they'll become an accountant. Who knows? But there will be fewer and fewer composers.
And that's the loss for the art scene here in Canada. I'm sure that there are plenty of advocacy steps that are being taken, but maybe in the interim, has there been any sort of dialogue that the Canadian League of Composers or other arts organizations that you're aware of, is there any dialogue happening with the Canada Council or Canadian Heritage about how this impacts the arts, and has there been any direct appeals made in that regard?
Yeah, so we are part of an organization called the Canadian Arts Coalition, which is a coalition of arts organizations from right across the country, covering all disciplines from music to theater to ballet to visual arts. And they have launched a letter writing campaign that's been going for a couple of weeks now. And so far, about just over, I checked this morning, over 6,600 Canadians have signed on to that campaign. We've been pushing it through our social media channels. Other arts organizations have been pushing it through their social media channels. And that's sort of our main tool for underlining to elected officials that these are really important, and Canadians care about this. We have surveys that show like over 80% of Canadians believe that the arts and culture sector contributes to our national identity, contributes to community. And so, people like hearing Canadian stories. They like hearing Canadian music. And so this campaign has provided folks a vehicle to let elected officials know that this matters. And so that's been our primary advocacy tool.
If indeed these cuts to the Canada Council's funding budget do go through, they are currently, as we can't say this enough, they're not really materialized yet, but if they are officially considered and eventually do go through, is there anything that the Canadian League of Composers or any of the other members of the Canadian Arts Coalition, are there any other sort of shortfall measures that you all are considering in preparation for maybe something like this to come down the line?
That's a good question. We've so far, this is sort of it's been an all hands on deck, almost an emergency situation. So speaking not just for the Canadian League of Composers, but for all the other organizations involved, we're really sort of we're 100% focused on this campaign and on trying to make sure that these cuts don't go through. And if they do go through, that it's less than 15%. In fact, we're actually arguing that based on the importance of arts and culture to society as a whole and to the economy, that the government should actually be investing, permanently allocating 1% of federal spending to Canadian artists, especially at a time when our sovereignty is under threat. So if the cuts go through, as an organization, there's not much we can do. We don't fund composers directly. We advocate on their behalf. So we'll just have to continue making the case to the federal government, making the case to provincial governments, making the case to municipal governments, that arts funding matters, artists matter, Canadians want to support Canadian artists, and to borrow some of the language that our Prime Minister often uses, we need to invest in Canadian artists so that they can help fight to keep Canada strong.
It'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds. August Murphy King from the Canadian League of Composers. Really appreciate you taking the time to walk us through this potential situation.
Thank you so much, Nolan. Really appreciate it.